Hello, and welcome to the first episode of God and Evil. My name is Brian Watson. I'm your host. And in this first episode, I'm going to introduce the podcast and also introduce myself. Now, why do we need another podcast? I'm not sure that the world needs another podcast, and I'm sure there are many types of podcasts that the world does not need more of. But there are podcasts that are substantive, that deal with important issues, whether those are historical issues, great ideas, philosophy, great books, theology, philosophy, things like that. And it seems to me that there's a space that isn't being addressed by one podcast in particular, and that is the problem of evil. So, in God and Evil, I'm going to deal mostly with what is called the problem of evil. Now, what is the problem of evil? I'm going to talk more about this in the second episode, but generally, the problem of evil is not actually one singular problem. It's a family of problems that are generated by the reality of evil in the world. So, evil produces all kinds of problems for all kinds of different people. Everyone has the existential problem of suffering. How is it that we cope with evil? How do we endure? How do we find hope? Where can we go for comfort and solace? Evil also generates practical issues, practical problems for people. We want to know how to prevent evil or eliminate evil or at least lessen evil and mitigate its effects. Evil also generates philosophical problems for people who are thoughtful, because no matter what your worldview is, what your value system, your belief system is, if you're a thoughtful person, you will want to think about where evil comes from. Why is there evil? What even is evil? Is there a way that evil can be eliminated, or is that just a pipe dream? And then for people who are religious, for people who believe in the existence of God, especially a singular God, for monotheists, there is a religious or a theological problem. Because monotheists usually believe that there is one God who is omniscient, so he knows every proposition that can be known, who is omnipotent. He has a full range of powers. He can do anything that is possible. And he's good, benevolent, loving, kind, righteous. So, how is it that there's this God and yet there's also evil? How do we make sense of that? And that can be a pressing problem because a lot of atheists will point to evil in the world as evidence against God. They say there can't be this God who is omniscient, omnipotent, and good and kind and loving because there's evil, or at least there's too much evil. There's too much seemingly pointless, horrific, grotesque evil. And so theists then have this issue of how do we respond to these claims? So that generally is the kind of thing we're talking about when we talk about the problem of evil. It's actually many different problems, and there are a lot of things to discover. There are a lot of things to explore and consider when we think of all those many different problems of evil. But I'm also calling the podcast God and Evil because I want to be able to address more things beyond just the narrow scope of the problem of evil, though really that encompasses quite a bit. But I'd like to also talk about things like, how do we know that God exists? What are the arguments for his existence? I'm a Christian, so I want to think, what are the arguments for the truth of Christianity? What are the arguments for the Bible being God's word and being true and reliable and so forth? And I also would like to take some episodes to talk about evil and how it's depicted in culture, how it's depicted in television, movies, and novels, what evil is. So I want to have the freedom to cover more than just theodicy after theodicy. But I'll get into more of that in the next episode. I want to introduce myself too. So as I said, my name is Brian Watson, and recently I completed a PhD in philosophy of religion, and I wrote a dissertation on the problem of evil. What is philosophy of religion? I should probably talk about that first. It is basically taking the tools of philosophy, so coming up with uh, precise definitions, clarifying concepts, making important distinctions, analyzing arguments, making arguments, and using those tools to study religion, to talk about religion. So sometimes philosophy of religion concerns arguments for the existence of God. It concerns how we know that there's a God. So it deals with epistemology. Sometimes it deals with metaphysics of a particular religion. So for Christianity, sometimes we think about how is it that there can be one God and yet he exists in three persons? How can the Son of God also have a human nature, as we say about Jesus? So we talk about the incarnation, things like that. Sometimes we talk about the coherence of the concept of God, and defining these attributes like omniscience and omnipotence and so forth. Um, the problem of evil is a big subject for philosophers of religion. So I took a seminar on that, but again, I wrote a dissertation on that, spent a lot of time thinking about it, a lot of time researching it. So I want to share what I've learned about evil, because I think it is not only interesting, but it's not just some academic exercise. It is a very practical and relevant exercise. And so hopefully the things that I'll share will give us not only food for thought, but some hope and some ability to cope in a world of suffering. But I'm not just an academic, I'm also a pastor, and I have been in full time pastoral ministry for 17 years, roughly. And I've dealt with a lot of suffering in church. Uh, I've been with people who have lost loved ones. I've conducted or been a part of, I don't know how many memorial services and funerals, probably at least 30, probably more than that. And so I've thought about suffering from that angle as a minister. I've thought about it theologically, I've thought about it philosophically, and of course, just as a person. Like everyone else, I've suffered physical pain, emotional pain, loss. Um, Life is hard. And so it's an important topic for everyone. And I hope that this will be of value to you, um, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you're a believer in God or not. If you are wanting to go on this journey, I invite you to come along, subscribe, listen, or watch subsequent episodes, and share with people who might benefit from this. I want to sign off on this first episode with a line that I will use at the end of every episode because I believe that it is true. And it is simply this: Jesus is the solution